I thought I'd been through some real cold weather before I hit that icy stretch of Highway 2 between Red Deer and Edmonton. It was supposed to be just another routine nighttime delivery, nothing major. The trouble started when I pulled into an area where the road seemed dead. No cars, no working streetlights, just freezing darkness and the screeching of tires on ice. The temperature outside was already around -30°C, which is common for this time of year. But what happened inside the cabin still doesn't make sense to this day, and I've never been able to explain it to anyone without sounding crazy. The truck's heater was on full blast. I check it all the time. The cabin is well insulated, and I usually even take my jacket off after a while. But after a certain point, I started to feel the cold seeping in. First through my fingertips. Then through my feet. The dashboard still showed that the heating system was active, but the temperature inside started to drop. Literally. I looked at the digital thermometer that I keep attached to the dashboard. It read -10°C. Then -20°C. In a matter of minutes, it reached -40°C. Inside the cabin. And that's when I started to hear the first cracks of ice. They seemed to be coming from under the rubber mat. As if the floor of the truck was freezing from the inside out. I instinctively pulled my foot away, as if I had stepped on a sheet of ice. And the strangest thing, the ice seemed to spread quickly. The windows began to fog up on the outside, something that never happened so suddenly. And when I ran my hand over it, I noticed that there was already a thin layer of ice forming on the inside. The inside of the cab. I had never seen that before. Not on trips in the Yukon, not in snowstorms. It was as if the heat was being sucked out. I turned off the radio, turned off all the interior lights, and tried to listen better. The truck was still moving, but it was as if I were entering a wrong place. A place without time. The sound of the engine seemed muffled, as if it were underwater. And suddenly, the popping sound stopped, only to be replaced by absolute silence. Dense. My eyes began to water from the cold, and all I could think about was getting out of there as quickly as possible. But something told me not to stop. And then, in the side mirror, I saw the first crack forming in the glass, on the inside. The crack came all at once, with a dull sound that made me jerk the steering wheel. The driver's side window cracked from the inside out, as if it had been punched in the face by an icy cold blow. And then I heard another crack, this time right under the seat. It was deeper, as if the floorboard was giving way. I looked down and saw a layer of ice forming around the base of the pedals. Thick. Bluish. I tried turning the heat up again, turning the system off and on again, nothing. The dashboard showed that everything was working normally, but the air was still incredibly cold. And the truck, even though it was running, seemed to slowly die. The weirdest thing was when I looked at the windshield and noticed that the ice was forming patterns. It wasn't normal condensation. It was patterns. Curved lines that seemed to move, as if the cold itself were writing something. I moved my face closer to get a better look, and I swear to God, it looked like a face. A subtle outline, with sunken eyes and an open mouth. As if there was someone outside, silently screaming. I immediately backed away, my heart racing. The face disappeared, but the feeling of being watched remained, as if there was something behind me in the cabin. I avoided looking in the rearview mirror. A part of me knew that if I looked, I would see something. And I didn't want to see it. But the fear of not knowing also consumed me. So I looked. And for a moment, it looked like the passenger seat was covered in snow. But it was quick. I blinked, and it was clear again. But it was getting colder. So much so that my breath froze in the air. Flakes of ice floating inside the cabin. I couldn't move my fingers properly anymore. I talked to myself, shivering, trying to stay conscious, because I felt like if I fell asleep there, I would never wake up. That's when the scariest thought of all occurred to me: what if it wasn't just cold? What if the road was alive, pulling truckers into a state of freezing that no one would ever find? That stretch of Highway 2, always deserted at night, always so quiet, maybe it was a trap. A place that simulates time and climate only to suck the life out slowly, without leaving a mark. And at that moment, with my heart racing and my eyes almost closing, I heard something. A whisper. Low, brittle, coming from the floorboards: "You're almost in." That gave me the last push I needed. I screamed, as if I were trying to break the ice with my voice. I stomped on the accelerator, even though the pedals were slipping. The truck responded with difficulty, as if it were stuck in something invisible. The cabin creaked, the windows cracked, and I felt the floor beneath me sinking millimeter by millimeter, as if I were standing on a lake that was about to crack. I looked one last time in the rearview mirror. No presence. But the back seats were white, covered in a frost that shouldn't be there. And the cracking sound came again, louder now, coming from the direction of the engine. It was then that I saw the lights of the next stop. A small gas station, almost a ghostly dot on the map. It was as if its presence had let me get there just to remind me that I could escape, or not. As soon as I crossed the first few illuminated meters of the station, the cabin suddenly began to heat up. As if someone had forcibly turned off the cooling system. The air returned, the sensors returned to normal, and the cracks stopped growing. I got out, trembling, my clothes stiff with ice and breathing heavily. The attendant looked at me as if I had just gotten out of an accident. He said that my truck had a thin layer of ice on the inside of the windows. I stayed there for hours, until the sun began to rise. The heater was on full blast. But still, the cold wouldn't go away from my chest. A kind of constant chill, as if part of me had been left on that road. In the following days, the truck's temperature sensors failed, the heating system didn't work properly, and the mechanics said they'd never seen anything like it. Everything seemed to have been sucked dry. As if the cabin had spent too much time in a freezer. And to this day, when I open the passenger door in the morning, I sometimes see my breath condensing before the engine even starts. I never made that trip at night again. I always managed to get there before sunset, even if it means leaving hours earlier. Because I know what I felt there. And I know that if I had stopped or slept for a few minutes, would be frozen right now with my face pressed against the windshield, just like the one I saw drawn in the ice. Some say that stretch has natural thermal faults, pockets of cold air. But no one can explain the sound of the ice cracking under the carpet. Or the whispers. Or the face. And if you ever pass by there, and the cabin starts to get cold, speed up. Or you don't come back. That night, US 101 seemed more deserted than usual. I often drive the stretch between Coos Bay and Astoria, so I was familiar with every curve and every patch of fog. But what I saw on that particular turn still haunts me. The road was covered in thick, heavy fog, the kind that your high beams do more harm than good. I turned on the fog lights, slowed down, and took it easy. The radio was crackling, the signal weak. I felt completely isolated. And that's when I heard the first horn. It came from behind. Loud, deep, but strange. It didn't sound like a normal horn, it sounded more like a long, distorted scream, like someone was yelling inside a metal tube. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw only fog. Thick. Flashing red lights, as if there was another truck there, but completely covered by fog. I slowed down even more, signaled to the right, and waited for the vehicle to pass. But nothing passed. And the horn sounded again, closer, as if it were glued to my back. But in the mirror, still just the fog flashing. This made me tense. I turned on my hazard lights and thought about pulling over at one of the road indentations to let the supposed truck continue. But as I looked for a safe place, the horn sounded again, this time loud enough to vibrate the side window. But the strange thing wasn't just the sound, it was the effect it caused. My ears hurt, as if the air inside the cabin had changed pressure. And even with the headlights on, the road ahead began to lose contrast. It was as if the fog was getting thicker, becoming more solid. I found a space to stop and pulled over. I got out with my flashlight and went to the back to see if the truck was visible. Nothing. The road behind me was completely empty. No tire tracks, no distant headlights. Just that heavy silence and the fog covering everything like a blanket. That's when I noticed something very wrong. The asphalt beneath my feet was shaking slightly. And then, from the middle of the fog behind my truck, came two red flashes. And then, another horn, only this time it seemed closer than ever. Screaming. Vibrating inside my chest. I ran back to the cabin, slammed the door, and started the engine without thinking twice. The horn echoed as if it were inside the truck now, but without any visible source. The fog swallowed the side mirrors. I couldn't even see the outline of the load. I stepped on it, but it seemed like the truck was barely moving. And then, on the dashboard, I noticed something else. The speedometer read 0. Even with the engine roaring, even with the road on an incline. It was as if I had stopped, or as if the road no longer existed. The interior light flickered. The radio came back on by itself with a low, almost human hiss. The horn sounded again. This time it was so close that I instinctively ducked, as if expecting the impact. Nothing happened. But something changed. The temperature dropped inside the cabin. Breath condensed quickly, the windows began to sweat inside. And the fog, which until then had only surrounded the truck, now seemed to be entering through the ventilation grill. A strange smell filled the space. It wasn't smoke. It was something damp, old, like a wet cloth left in the dark. And along with it, the sound of an engine, another engine, began to accompany mine, in perfect synchrony, but coming from behind. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and this time I saw a silhouette. A truck. All covered in fog, with no license plate, no headlights, but with two small red lights blinking dimly, like tired eyes. And then I saw it. It had no cabin. Just the long, black body, like an unmarked container, gliding along the road without making a sound. It was as if it were floating, but even so it left the asphalt vibrating slightly. I put it in first gear and accelerated hard. The lights on the dashboard flashed, and for a second, everything went black: engine, radio, headlights. There was total silence. When the lights came back on, the truck behind me was gone. But the smell remained. And the speedometer still read 0. The road ahead was still shrouded in the same fog, but now it seemed thicker, as if I were driving through an endless corridor. The horn honked again, but with less force, like a distant echo. And that was when I realized that the truck behind me didn't want to pass me. It just wanted to follow me. The road, the cold, the sound, it was all part of a scenario designed to trap me. As if I'd been pulled into a parallel space where time and place were recycled. I continued driving aimlessly, trusting only in the yellow line on the road that I could still see. The GPS had frozen, the radio was emitting a low buzz, and my cell phone, dead. No signal, no battery, even though it had been charged hours before. For a few minutes, I thought I would be stuck there forever. But then, out of nowhere, the horn sounded for the last time, fainter, like a distant scream being sucked into the fog. And at that very moment, visibility began to return. The fog was dissipating quickly, as if it were being sucked into the bushes on the sides of the highway. And the sky opened up. Out of nowhere. I parked at the first gas station I saw open. An employee looked at me strangely, asked if I had a fever, and said I looked wet with sweat. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror, red eyes, a cold forehead, and the collar of my shirt completely damp. I washed my face and sat for half an hour inside the cabin, unable to turn off the engine. The light on the dashboard finally showed the correct speed. The strange smell disappeared. But what didn't go away was the feeling that something had gotten tangled up in me on that road. And that it was still there, waiting for the next chance. In the following days, I tried to rationalize. I spoke to other drivers, discreetly, and 2 of them said they had already felt something different on that same stretch. One told me about a truck without headlights that passes by and never appears in the rearview mirror. The other, about a horn that vibrates inside his chest. Neither wanted to go into more detail. And they all avoided eye contact when they spoke. As if it were something that could only be told in passing, without paying much attention, because paying too much attention attracts more. I got the message. To this day, if I'm on US 101 and it starts to fog up, I pull over. I wait. I don't go into that lane at night anymore, and if someone honks behind me, I don't look in my rearview mirror. Because that night, the horn honked, and the mirror showed nothing but fog with flashing red lights. And I swear, that wasn't a truck trying to pass me. It was something trying to catch up. The M6 at night is strange enough, especially on the stretches between Birmingham and Lancaster. Anyone who drives there often knows that in the early hours of the morning the road feels different. Emptier than it should. And on this particular night, I was heading north at almost 2 a.m., with a light load of household appliances. Traffic was light, headlights were low, the radio was on low just to keep my mind active. It was after passing a stretch of roadworks that I noticed the strangest thing I've ever seen on the road. A third lane. But not on the road. In the mirror. I looked in the side mirror and saw, quite clearly, an extra lane appearing out of nowhere, on the right side. Well aligned, well paved, as if it were part of the highway. But when I looked directly out the window, there was nothing. Just the guardrail and the dark bushes. It was impossible. I looked in the mirror again, and there it was. Well lit, as if it had its own streetlights. I even saw a car passing by, silent, with blue lights. But there was no engine noise, no reflection in the windows. It was like watching another road existing in a reflection that shouldn't be there. Curiosity got the better of me. I steered the truck a little to the right, to align myself with this supposed lane. In the mirror, it looked like I had entered. But in direct view, I was still in the normal lane. Nothing had changed. Except that the GPS stopped responding. The route line froze, and the needle started spinning on its own axis. The radio started to fail. And the scariest thing, the digital clock on the dashboard was stuck at 2:04. Everything seemed to be working, except the time. I continued driving like that for a few seconds, tense, hoping that it was just a temporary glitch. But then I looked in the rearview mirror again, and the road behind me had disappeared. Instead of the usual 2-lane road, there was only that third lane, like a straight, endless tunnel, with a strange sheen on the ground. It looked wet, but it wasn't raining. And I kept driving, feeling like I was trapped in a space that wasn't here. I felt the air change. It became still, dense, and even with the truck going 50 miles per hour, there was no wind against the windshield. And so, without realizing it, I spent more than 4 hours there, without stopping, without passing a single car. Just that endless strip of road appearing in the mirror, and nothing else. It wasn't until the GPS started beeping non-stop that I realized something had changed. The screen flickered, the needle spun like crazy, and then, everything went black. At that moment, the radio came back on with a loud pop, and the dashboard clock jumped to 2:07. It had only been 3 minutes since I'd last looked. But my watch said 6:12. So did my phone. And I was thirsty, my back hurting, like I'd been driving for hours. I pulled over into a recess, my head spinning, trying to make sense of it. The place was the same. The road was now 2 lanes, as if nothing had happened. I got out of the truck to see if I could find an explanation. I stood there, staring at the road, listening to the distant sound of cars passing by further ahead. When I bent down to check the tires, I saw something that made me freeze, a strange, silvery residue covering the sides of the rear tires. It was as if I had driven over a road made of liquid metal. I touched it and it was cold, it stuck to my skin like frozen grease. I had never seen anything like that before or since. I tried to take pictures, but all I could see on my cell phone were smudges. No image could capture the substance. I climbed back into the cab, my hands shaking. I started the engine and checked the entire system. Everything seemed normal. The dashboard showed no faults. But the GPS history recorded a phantom 140-mile stretch that didn't match any part of the M6. A route that doesn't exist on any map. Just a straight, continuous line, crossing fields where there is no road. I saved a printout of it, but the file became corrupt after a few days. Even so, I remember the name that appeared above the route, 3rd lane active. In the following days, I had strange nightmares. I would wake up sweating, with the feeling of being trapped inside a mirror. Everything was reversed. Cars would pass me in reverse, and the road would curve around me in endless curves. One of the dreams ended with my truck going through a wall of fog, and into that silver lane, with no way back. I woke up to the sound of a low horn, like an echo. And since then, I have avoided looking in the rearview mirror for too long. Because sometimes, when the road is empty, and the light hits it in a specific way, the 3rd lane reappears. After that night, I avoid taking the M6 at very late hours. And when I can't, I keep my mirrors adjusted just so I can see the bare minimum. Because I've already tested it, by accident, once. I took a quick look one moonless morning, and there it was again. The 3rd lane. Tilted, as if it were smiling, waiting for me to line up the truck in it. But now, I know. I know that if I go there again, I might not come back. Or worse, I might come back, but differently. With more time passed than the clock shows. With something extra inside the truck. I spoke to 2 old drivers about it. One just kept quiet. But the other looked at me and said, "You saw it too, didn't you? The stripe that only shows up in the mirror." And then he stopped talking. He didn't even want to explain. He just got up, finished his coffee and left. I never saw him at the gas stations where he used to stop again. Some say he abandoned everything. Others say he disappeared on a stretch of the M6, and they only found the truck hours later, empty, engine running, mirrors broken. There are many things on this road that we don't understand. People who disappear for hours and come back without knowing where they were. Trucks with tracks that don't match the route. Clocks that don't sync. And rearview mirrors that show tracks that don't exist. Nowadays, everyone focuses on GPS and technology, but sometimes, the problem is precisely the reflections. Because what the eye sees directly, isn't everything. Sometimes, the mirror shows more than it should. It shows what's on the other side of the road. Or on the other side of reality. And if you're ever on the M6, in the early hours of the morning, on an empty road, and you notice that your rearview mirror seems to show an extra lane, don't go in. Don't turn. Don't try to, just take a look. Because I came back on the GPS 4 hours later. But only 3 minutes had passed on the clock. And to this day I don't know what happened to the other 3 hours. Or what came back with me. I thought the worst thing about the Nullarbor was the boredom. Miles and miles of nothing, just straight asphalt, the big sky and the constant feeling that you were crossing a world that had already ended. It was the kind of journey I accepted when I wanted to be silent and reflect. But that night, the silence was different. I was driving from Sigtuna to Norseman, in the middle of nowhere, and around 1 a.m. I started hearing what sounded like music. At first I thought it was the radio. But it had been turned off for a while. And yet, the melody continued. It was soft, slow, like a chorus of female voices coming from somewhere far out in the desert. But I could see no lights, no structures, nothing but the straight line of the road. The wind was still, the sky clear. There was no way the sound could be coming from a village, because there weren't any for hundreds of miles around. Yet I could hear it clearly. The music drifted through the cabin as if it were being sung from outside. A beautiful harmony, but disconcerting. It didn't fit the place. Or the time. I turned everything off at once. Headlights, engine, air conditioning, even the interior light. I wanted to see if the sound would go away. I stood still on the side of the highway, listening to the absolute nothingness. But the choir continued. Only louder now. And amidst the voices, one of them stood out. It was different. A little quieter, closer. And it said my name. Without making a mistake. Without hesitation. Whispered, as if it were glued to the glass of the door. Mark, paused, drawn out, in the same rhythm as the melody. At that moment, I lost my breath. I couldn't move. I just stood there, trying to understand how something could know my name in that vast emptiness. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, trying to concentrate, to think of some rational explanation. But when I opened them again, I saw something in the rearview mirror. It wasn't a person. It was like a silhouette made of sand, standing in the middle of the road. No face, no clothes, just a human form trembling slightly, like heat distorting the air. And the music stopped. Everything went silent for a second. Then it came back, closer. As if it were now inside the cabin. And the voice that spoke my name, whispered a phrase that still echoes in my head, "You've been here before." My instinct was to turn everything back on and get out of there as quickly as possible. But when I turned the key, the engine didn't respond. Not a single light on the dashboard. The battery was fine, there had been no previous warning. It was as if the truck had been turned off by something other than me. I tried the radio. Silence. My cell phone, no signal, no light, no life. And the worst part was that even then, the music continued. Now it was no longer a distant choir. It was a single voice. Steady. From inside. As if someone had sat in the passenger seat, singing to me in a calm tone, as if they were rocking me. I turned my head slowly, not wanting to look, but unable to help myself. The seat was empty. But the smell was different. A dry, wet desert scent, like hot earth after rain. And the passenger window, fogged up. As if someone had breathed there. A precise circle of vapor, slowly disappearing. My hair stood on end all at once. It was impossible. I wasn't asleep, it wasn't a hallucination. I was awake, alert. And something there knew who I was. Where I was. And it seemed happy about it. I closed my eyes again, trying to stay calm. When I opened them, the windshield was completely dark. I couldn't see the road or the sky. It was as if I'd been covered by a black tarp. But then the dashboard suddenly lit up. Not with ordinary lights, with symbols I'd never seen before. Like runes. Red, pulsing. And among them, a single word flashing by itself, in English, sing. Then the melody began to change. Faster, more intense. The voice now sounded anxious. Almost hungry. As if it was waiting for something from me. I pulled the crucifix off the mirror and began to pray. Out loud. The only thing that came to mind. And then I heard the reaction. The voice retreated. As if it had been pushed. And along with it, the dashboard flickered and turned off. The engine sputtered and started up again. The headlights came on, and the windshield cleared all at once, as if nothing had happened. The road appeared again, straight, empty, silent. But for a few seconds, I still heard it. Far away, in the back of my head, the same voice repeating softly, "Mark, don't stop next time." I drove for almost 2 hours straight, without blinking, with the radio off and my eyes fixed on the road. The sky slowly began to lighten, and only then did I realize how much my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. When I arrived at a gas station near Norseman, the attendant looked at me with a strange expression. He said I looked frozen, even with the engine running and the sun rising. I went into the bathroom and saw my face in the mirror, pale, my eyes sunken, and my ears, with a faint trace of dried blood. As if something had been singing inside my head too loudly. I sat there, locked in the cab, until the sun was high in the sky. I checked the truck systems, and everything was normal. No errors, no glitches. But my phone was still dead, and my watch, stuck at 2:48, exactly when I first heard my name. I've never driven on the Nullarbor at night since. I only drive there when it's daylight and company. And even then, every now and then, I feel the air change. It gets drier. Thicker. And I know that if I turn everything off again, I might hear that melody come back where it left off. I told the story to 2 fellow travelers, and one of them got very serious. He said he had heard similar stories. People who disappeared for a few hours in the middle of the desert and came back, different. Silent. With a lost look in their eyes. One of them, according to him, got out of the truck in the middle of the road, in the dark, saying that the music was calling him. He was never seen again. The truck was found running, with the headlights pointed at a random point in the middle of nowhere. And the radio, playing a tune with no station. Today, when I listen to too much music on the road, I pay attention. If the melody starts to sound too good to be true, I turn it off. Because that night, when I turned it off, I could still hear the melody. And someone was singing my name. And I know that if I had answered, maybe I wouldn't have come back. I installed that mirror for practicality. One of those panoramic view models, attached to the corner of the windshield, to make maneuvering easier and to see blind spots inside the cabin. A fellow driver had recommended it and said it was a great help, especially in trucks with extended cabs. Mine didn't have much space in the back, just a hard bench with a backpack and a toolbox. Nothing else. But I thought it might be useful. I bought it at a stop in Amarillo and installed it right there before heading to El Paso. The road was clear, the sky was starry, and the ride was smooth. At least, until I looked in the new mirror. At first, it only reflected the normal, the road behind, the seats, the ceiling. But after a few hours of driving in the dark, I noticed something strange. A shape. Small. like it was a crooked reflection of something in the back seat. I quickly turned to check, but of course, there was nothing there. I looked in the mirror again. The shape was still there. A dark, motionless blur. I thought it was dirt, reflection of external light, or even fatigue. But when I stopped at a diner and cleaned the mirror, it still showed that. Like it was part of the reflection, and not a real thing. As we got back on the road, the blur became clearer. The shape was that of a woman. Standing still, sitting exactly in the center of the bench that didn't even have room for anyone. Her shoulders were straight, her head slightly tilted. At first, she looked like a shadow. But then, as I passed streetlights or the lights of other cars, I noticed the clearer outline of her skin. And then I saw her face. Or rather, the absence of it. She had no eyes. Just deep, dark, dull cavities. And yet, it was as if she were staring at me. Every time I made a turn, her reflection seemed to turn with me, following me. I tried to ignore it. To convince myself that it was an illusion, tiredness, some flaw in the glass. But with each bend in the road, the presence became more insistent. It didn't move. It didn't disappear. And at one point, during a completely dark and straight stretch, I heard something that froze me. A sharp thud behind the seat. As if someone had hit me with their hand. I turned my head on impulse, and of course, nothing. Except that the mirror now showed the woman closest. As if she had leaned forward. Her eyeless face almost touching my seat back. My throat went dry. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but curiosity got the better of me. Every time I glanced quickly in the mirror, she seemed closer. Her body leaned forward, her head turned slightly toward me. It was as if she only moved when I wasn't looking. With each glance, a step forward. Until one day I found myself playing an involuntary game, glance quickly, look away, look again. And she was always a little closer. There was a moment when I saw her hair clearly, black, stuck to her face, as if it had been wet. Her skin looked cold. Pale. Like cracked porcelain. I stopped the truck at a rest area, my hands shaking. I turned on all the interior lights, turned around and stared at the seat. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But the mirror still showed her. There she was, sitting. Motionless. I even tried to pull the mirror off, but it seemed stuck, as if it had fused with the glass. I pulled hard, and at that moment, I felt a cold breath on my neck. It wasn't wind, because all the windows were closed. It was as if someone had breathed behind me. I turned around on impulse, empty. But the mirror showed her head bent over, glued behind mine. I got back on the road completely shaken. I turned the radio up to full volume, left the air conditioning on high, anything to feel like I was still in control of the cabin. But she wouldn't disappear. Every curve I made, her reflection leaned along with it. Even without eyes, it was as if she was watching me with an absurd fixation. And the worst was when I got to a flat stretch, around 3 in the morning. The entire road reflected the moonlight, the truck was silent, and she smiled. I saw it. The face that until then had been motionless, cracked, lifeless, smiled. Slowly. Forced. As if she was learning to imitate. That smile broke me. I started to cry. Not out of fear, but out of exhaustion, because I couldn't understand what was happening. Because I had nowhere to run. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded only by asphalt, darkness, and a mirror that showed something that shouldn't exist. I thought about getting rid of the truck, stopping, running away. But I knew that if I did that, maybe she would follow me. She seemed trapped in the reflection. In the image. In the glass. But what if that changed? What if, the moment I stopped looking, she crossed over here? When I finally arrived at the trucking company's yard, the sun was already starting to rise. The natural light seemed to weaken her presence. The mirror became opaque, as if it were fogged up, and her reflection disappeared for a few seconds. I took advantage of the moment and ripped the mirror off with a single jerk, throwing it into the dumpster nearby. I stood there, staring at the truck. Everything was silent. But even so, I still felt it. That feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. As if she were there, even without the mirror. As if she had learned another way to stay close. I came home shaking. I slept badly for days. Every time I passed a mirror, I looked away. Any reflection would put me on alert. I went to the doctor, got tests done, took tranquilizers. Nothing helped. Until one day, I opened the glove compartment to get a document and found a piece of the broken mirror that must have fallen in there without me noticing. It was covered in dust and dried blood, my own, probably, from when I ripped it off. But in the reflection of that fragment, deep down, almost imperceptible, she was still there. Smiling. Farther away. But there. I threw it away immediately. I burned it, actually. And since then, I've never put extra mirrors on the truck. Only the mandatory ones, and I barely look at them. Time has passed, but there are nights when the memory comes back in full, with all the details. And when I make curves, I still feel that sensation of something moving along with it, as if the cabin had an echo. A reflection that remains alive, even without a mirror. As if it had adapted. It learned to live in memory, not just in the glass. It was a woman. Without eyes. She stared at me from every angle. And now, even without seeing, I know she's still there. Waiting for the next reflection.